Have you ever wondered why some men seem to quietly carry this effortless confidence at night? Like something about them shifts when the world goes silent, while others feel stuck in their own head, overthinking, doubting, and disconnected from their own masculine energy. Because the truth is, attraction is not just about what happens in the moment. It is built in the hours before, in the rituals no one sees, in the way a man treats his body, his mind, and his presence when nobody is watching. Tonight, I want to take you into something most men completely overlook. A nighttime oil routine that is not just about skin or relaxation, but about resetting the nervous system, improving circulation, calming performance anxiety, and rebuilding the internal state that naturally supports confidence and intimacy, without force, without pressure, and without pretending to be someone else. And before you misunderstand this is not about magic tricks or manipulation. It is about understanding how the male body and mind respond to consistency, touch, recovery, and emotional regulation. Because attraction in relationships often begins long before two people are even physically close. It begins in how a man prepares himself to feel grounded in his own body. Now imagine ending your day not with stress, screens, and scattered thoughts, but with a deliberate ritual that signals to your nervous system that it is safe to relax, safe to recover, and safe to restore your natural rhythm. This is where the nighttime oil routine comes in, not as a cosmetic habit, but as a psychological and physiological reset that can influence energy, presence, and yes, even intimate performance in a deeply indirect but powerful way. When we talk about male performance in relationships, we are not only talking about physical ability, we are talking about confidence, emotional stability, and the ability to stay present without spiraling into pressure or fear of not being enough. Many men do not struggle because they lack desire. They struggle because their nervous system is constantly stuck in a state of tension, stress, or overthinking, and that state silently kills natural attraction because it removes ease from the interaction. What this oil routine does, when done intentionally, is simple on the surface but profound underneath. It introduces touch, warmth, scent, and rhythm into the end of the day in a way that tells the brain, you are safe, you are in control, you do not need to rush, you do not need to chase, you can simply exist in your body. When a man begins to reconnect with his own body in a calm, grounded way, something changes in his presence. His voice becomes steadier, his eye contact becomes more natural, and his interactions become less about proving something and more about expressing something real. And that shift is often what creates emotional and physical attraction in women who were previously not showing interest, not because he changed who he is, but because he stopped operating from anxiety and started operating from grounded confidence. The nighttime oil routine itself is not complicated, but its power lies in intention and repetition. It can involve warm, natural oils applied to areas of the body where tension accumulates, like shoulders, chest, neck, hands, and even legs, combined with slow breathing and a conscious slowing down of thoughts. This is not about stimulation, it is about regulation, because the male body holds stress in physical form, and when that stress is not released, it shows up in subtle ways: impatience, irritability, emotional distance, and yes, even reduced performance in intimate situations due to pressure rather than presence. Oils like natural herbal blends or simple carrier oils have been traditionally used in many cultures, not only for skin health, but for relaxation and grounding. And when combined with self-massage, they activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for recovery, digestion, relaxation, and emotional balance. When a man enters this state consistently at night, his sleep quality improves, his hormonal balance stabilizes, and his overall sense of masculinity becomes less about force and more about calm certainty. And that is where attraction begins to shift in subtle but powerful ways. Women are not simply responding to looks or words, they are responding to energy. And energy is heavily influenced by how regulated a man's internal state is. A man who is constantly tense may come across as unpredictable or distant, while a man who is calm in his body naturally feels more trustworthy, more grounded, and more emotionally safe to be around. This is why something as simple as a nighttime oil routine can become more than self-care. It becomes identity training. It becomes a signal to your subconscious that you are someone who takes care of yourself, someone who slows down, someone who is not ruled by stress or urgency. Over time, this changes how you show up in conversations, in eye contact, in silence, and even in physical intimacy. Because intimacy is not built in a single moment. It is built in the accumulation of presence. There is also a deeper psychological layer here that many men miss, which is the connection between touch and emotional grounding. When a man learns to give himself calm, intentional touch without judgment or distraction, he reduces dependency on external validation for emotional stability. This creates a quiet form of confidence that is extremely attractive because it does not seek approval. It simply exists. And when this internal shift happens, even a woman who initially seemed uninterested may begin to notice a change in how you carry yourself. Not because you are trying to win her attention, but because you are no longer leaking insecurity into the space between you. The irony is that attraction often increases when pursuit decreases, and presence increases. The nighttime oil routine becomes a tool for that transformation, because it anchors you back into your body at the end of every day, instead of leaving you mentally scattered or emotionally drained. It is in that grounded state that a man naturally becomes more centered in communication, more patient in emotional exchanges, and more stable in moments that would normally trigger anxiety or overthinking. And all of this quietly contributes to better intimacy, because real intimacy requires presence, not pressure. When you are fully in your body, you are no longer performing, you are experiencing, and that shift alone changes everything about how connection feels. There is a reason why men who develop consistent evening rituals often report feeling more confident, not just in relationships, but in life overall, because discipline in private creates stability in public. And stability is one of the most underrated forms of attraction. When a woman senses that a man is not easily shaken, not constantly restless, and not emotionally scattered, her perception of him naturally deepens, because safety is a core driver of attraction, even when it is not consciously acknowledged. So this routine is not about oils alone, it is about what the oils represent: a slowing down, a reconnection, a return to self, and a deliberate choice to step out of chaos before sleep. It is about ending the day in a way that rebuilds your internal foundation instead of weakening it. And once you understand this, you start to see that performance in relationships is never just about what happens in the bedroom. It is about the state you carry into every interaction leading up to it. This is where everything begins to shift, and in the next part, we will go deeper into how this nighttime routine directly influences desire, emotional attraction, and the subtle psychological triggers that make a woman who seemed disinterested begin to see you in a completely different light. Not because you changed who you are, but because you changed how you inhabit yourself. When you begin to understand how deeply a woman's emotional attraction is tied to your internal state rather than your external effort, the entire idea of trying harder starts to collapse. Because effort without grounding often reads as pressure, and pressure rarely creates desire. It creates resistance or emotional distance. What this nighttime oil routine begins to influence, in a much more subtle way than most men realize, is not just relaxation of the body, but the recalibration of your emotional presence. And emotional presence is one of the strongest predictors of whether intimacy deepens or fades over time. In relationships, especially in early attraction phases, women are not simply evaluating what you say. They are constantly reading how you exist in the space between words, how comfortable you are in silence, how you respond when things slow down, and whether your energy feels stable or erratic. A man who has trained his nervous system through consistent nighttime rituals like this oil practice begins to show up differently during the day without even thinking about it. Because the body remembers what calm feels like, and once it remembers, it starts to prefer it over tension. This is where attraction starts to shift in a very organic way, not because of tactics, but because of presence. When a woman senses that a man is not internally rushed, not emotionally unstable, and not constantly seeking validation, she experiences a different kind of psychological safety around him. And safety is one of the most overlooked foundations of desire. It does not mean comfort in a boring sense. It means the body stops perceiving unpredictability or emotional volatility, which allows deeper layers of attraction to surface naturally. The nighttime oil routine contributes to this by repeatedly signaling to your system that the day is ending in control, not chaos, in awareness, not distraction, in grounding, not overstimulation. Over time, this consistency begins to reshape how your mind interprets stress, especially in relational situations where emotional tension might normally cause overthinking or reactive behavior. Instead of reacting impulsively, you begin to pause, breathe, and stay centered, and that pause changes everything in how you are perceived. Many men underestimate how much attraction is actually built in these micro moments of regulation. A slight hesitation before reacting, a calm response instead of a defensive one, a steady tone instead of anxious energy, all of these are subtle signals that communicate emotional maturity. And emotional maturity is deeply attractive because it suggests reliability, not just in romance, but in connection. The oil routine itself becomes a symbolic anchor for this shift, because it is one of the few moments in the day where you are intentionally slowing your system down, physically engaging with your own body in a way that is non-performative, non-competitive, and completely self-contained. That matters more than it seems, because modern masculinity is often pushed into constant output, constant performance, constant stimulation, and very little recovery. Without recovery, the nervous system becomes reactive, and reactivity is the opposite of grounded attraction. When you use this routine to deliberately transition from external engagement to internal calm, you are essentially teaching your body that it does not need to stay in survival mode. And when survival mode decreases, presence increases. Presence is what allows real intimacy to form, because intimacy requires you to actually be there, not mentally somewhere else, not stuck in performance anxiety, not distracted by self-judgment. A man who is present does not need to force connection, because connection naturally follows his attention. This is also where the indirect influence on intimate performance begins to make sense, not as something mechanical, but as something deeply psychological. Performance anxiety is rarely about physical capability. It is about mental interference, self-monitoring, and fear of failure. When your nervous system is calm and regulated through consistent grounding practices, like this oil routine, the internal noise decreases, and when internal noise decreases, natural responsiveness increases. This is not something you can force in the moment. It is something you build outside of it. And that is why nighttime routines matter more than people think, because they are where your system either stabilizes or deteriorates over time. Another layer that is often ignored is the way this practice subtly changes how you relate to touch in general. When a man becomes comfortable with intentional, slow, mindful touch of his own body, he becomes less tense and more natural with physical presence in relationships. There is less hesitation, less awkwardness, and less unconscious distancing. Instead, there is a more grounded physical confidence that does not feel performative. Women often notice this shift without being able to explain it directly. They may simply describe it as feeling more comfortable or safe around him, but underneath that language is a deeper recognition of emotional and physical steadiness. This is where attraction deepens beyond surface-level interest. It is not about impressing someone. It is about becoming someone whose presence feels steady enough to relax into. And relaxation is a key gateway to emotional and physical closeness. At the same time, this routine also indirectly reduces one of the biggest hidden barriers in modern relationships, which is mental fragmentation. Many men go to bed still mentally connected to their phones, their stress, their tasks, and their unresolved emotional tension from the day. That fragmentation carries into interactions, making them less attentive and more internally distracted. The oil routine acts as a bridge out of that fragmentation because it forces a physical pause, a tactile engage, and a sensory reset that brings you back into the present moment. Over time, this creates a noticeable difference in how deeply you listen, how calmly you respond, and how emotionally available you are in conversations. Emotional availability is not about being overly expressive. It is about being fully there without resistance. When a woman feels that a man is fully present with her, not half distracted or mentally elsewhere, her emotional openness naturally increases, because humans mirror the level of attention they receive. And this is where desire begins to quietly grow in situations where it did not initially exist, not because of persuasion, but because of resonance. People are drawn to what feels aligned, stable, and emotionally clear. So the real transformation here is not the oil itself, but the discipline of showing up for yourself every night in a way that reinforces calm identity. That identity then begins to influence how you move through relationships, how you handle uncertainty, and how you manage emotional tension without collapsing into insecurity. And as this foundation strengthens, something subtle happens in how others respond to you, especially in romantic dynamics. You become less emotionally reactive, more grounded in your responses, and more comfortable with not forcing outcomes. That lack of force is often what allows attraction to develop naturally, because it removes pressure from the interaction and replaces it with ease. Ease is powerful because it creates space for curiosity, and curiosity is often the beginning of desire. So when we talk about this nighttime oil routine, we are really talking about building an internal environment where attraction is no longer something you chase, but something that emerges from how you live in your own body and mind. And in the next part, we will go deeper into how this internal shift directly influences emotional connection, long-term intimacy, and the psychological patterns that determine whether attraction grows stronger over time or slowly fades into disinterest. As this practice becomes a consistent part of your evenings, something more subtle than confidence begins to form, something closer to emotional coherence, where your thoughts, your body, and your reactions stop pulling in different directions and start working together instead of against each other. This is where the real transformation in relationships quietly begins, because attraction is not sustained by intensity alone. It is sustained by emotional clarity and consistency. When a man is internally inconsistent, sometimes calm, sometimes anxious, sometimes present, sometimes distracted, the emotional field he creates becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability may create initial curiosity, but rarely sustains deep desire. The nighttime oil routine, when practiced with intention, slowly reduces that inconsistency by training your system to end each day in a controlled, grounded state. Over time, this creates a baseline of calm that begins to show up even in emotionally charged situations. You respond differently, not because you are suppressing emotion, but because you are no longer being hijacked by it. And this shift is often what changes how a woman experiences attraction toward you, especially if she initially seemed distant or uninterested. Emotional attraction in women is deeply tied to how safe and steady a man feels in her nervous system, not just in his words, but in his energy and reactions. When she begins to sense that your presence does not fluctuate wildly with external circumstances, something important changes internally for her. She stops feeling the need to protect her emotional space and starts feeling more open to sharing it. That opening is not forced. It is earned through consistency. And consistency is exactly what this nightly ritual builds in the background, quietly shaping your emotional stability while you sleep, while you recover, while you reset. Another important layer here is the way this routine reshapes your relationship with desire itself. Many men approach intimacy from a place of urgency or pressure, where desire is something to be achieved or triggered, rather than something that naturally emerges from connection. But when your nervous system is regularly grounded, your relationship with desire becomes less anxious and more present. You stop interpreting attraction as a performance requirement and start experiencing it as a shared emotional rhythm. This reduces internal pressure, and when internal pressure reduces, natural responsiveness increases, not just physically, but emotionally and conversationally as well. You begin to listen differently, speak differently, and engage differently, because you are no longer operating from a mindset of, how do I get this outcome? But rather from, how do I stay present in this interaction? And presence is what allows emotional intimacy to deepen over time. Women often describe this kind of shift in vague language, saying a man feels more real, more easy to talk to, or more comfortable to be around. But what they are actually responding to is the absence of internal tension being projected outward. The oil routine contributes to this by acting as a daily emotional reset point, where your body is given permission to release accumulated stress through touch, warmth, and slow attention. This repeated act of self-regulation builds what psychologists often refer to as emotional regulation capacity, which is essentially your ability to stay balanced under internal or external pressure. Higher regulation capacity does not make you less masculine, it makes your masculinity more stable. And stability is often what allows attraction to deepen beyond surface excitement. Over time, this stability begins to influence how you handle uncertainty in relationships. Instead of overanalyzing every shift in behavior or tone, you become more comfortable with emotional ambiguity, and that comfort removes a major source of attraction-killing anxiety. Because anxiety in relationships is rarely attractive, it tends to contract emotional space, while calm expands it. And expansion is what allows desire to breathe and grow naturally, rather than being forced into existence through effort or persuasion. This is also where long-term intimacy is shaped. Many relationships do not fail because attraction disappears overnight. They fade because emotional presence slowly declines under the weight of stress, distraction, and unresolved internal tension. When a man is not actively managing his internal state, he often carries that fragmentation into the relationship, even if unintentionally. The nighttime oil routine interrupts that cycle by creating a daily moment of reintegration, where the body is soothed, the mind is slowed, and the nervous system is brought back into balance. This may seem simple, but repetition is what creates transformation. The brain begins to associate this routine with safety and closure, and that association gradually reduces baseline stress levels over time. Lower baseline stress changes everything, from how you sleep, to how you communicate, to how emotionally available you are when it matters most. And emotional availability is one of the most powerful drivers of long-term attraction because it allows connection to deepen beyond novelty and into familiarity, trust, and emotional resonance. In that space, attraction is no longer dependent on constant stimulation. It becomes something more stable, something that can exist even in silence, even in routine, even in ordinary moments. This is where real intimacy lives. Not in intensity, but in consistency. And the irony is that many men try to create intimacy through effort, through trying harder, through saying more or doing more, when in reality, intimacy often grows in the spaces where pressure is removed and presence is increased. The oil routine supports that removal of pressure by giving you a structured way to exit the day without carrying its emotional residue into your relationships or your identity. And as this becomes habitual, you begin to notice that your interactions feel less strained, your reactions feel less impulsive, and your sense of self feels more anchored. That anchoring is what makes you naturally more attractive, not because you are trying to be, but because you are no longer internally fragmented. And when a woman interacts with a man who is internally anchored, she often feels it as a kind of emotional ease, a sense that she does not need to overthink, overcompensate, or guard herself excessively. That ease is what allows desire to grow without resistance. Because at its core, attraction is not just about stimulation. It is about emotional alignment. And emotional alignment is built in moments like this, quiet, repetitive, intentional moments that most people overlook. Now, when we bring everything together, the real conclusion becomes clear. This nighttime oil routine is not a technique to boost performance or a trick to increase attraction. It is a system for rebuilding your internal state so that everything you experience in relationships becomes more grounded, more present, and more emotionally coherent. It reshapes how you end your day, which reshapes how your nervous system resets, which reshapes how you show up in connection, which ultimately reshapes how attraction develops and sustains itself over time. When a man learns to regulate himself consistently in private, he naturally becomes more stable in public. And that stability is what creates trust, and trust is what allows desire to deepen instead of fade. You stop chasing connection and start embodying the kind of presence that makes connection feel natural. And in that shift, everything changes, not just how others respond to you, but how you experience yourself in relationships, in intimacy, and in your own identity.